Today we're going to talk about the Crimean War, and so you can go ahead and follow along on the chart as we fill this in. So the first thing that we need to start with is the status of the Ottoman Empire by this point, which is the mid-1800s. So factors that had led to the decline of the Ottoman Empire were nationalist revolts, and a really good one that you've already learned is Greece becoming independent in the early part of the 1800s. So there were other minorities within the Ottoman Empire who wanted to break away and form their own nations. So territories that had already lost by 1850 would be Greece and other areas of the Balkans. And so this led the rest of the European nations to have this question that they called the Eastern Question, which is who would benefit from the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. Because they see that the Ottomans are declining, and they feel that the Ottomans are going to eventually collapse, which we know they did right after World War I. But who's going to take over that territory? Because we have Russia relatively close, we have the Austrian Empire relatively close, Italy is even relatively close, and so who's going to control that territory and benefit from that was something that Europeans were very concerned about. And that makes sense because if we think about after the Congress of Vienna, the concert system and the importance of the balance of power to Europeans, they're very concerned that if one country gains a foothold in the territory of the Ottoman Empire, they'll be able to become more powerful than the others. Russia especially had an interest in some of the territories of the Ottoman Empire because a lot of people in Eastern Europe who were under the control of the Ottomans were Orthodox Christian. And we know that that is the same religion as the Russians. And so they felt this religious bond, which kind of tied them together in a nationalistic sense. Also, Russia could use that as an excuse to want to take over this territory as a justification. Because Russia is really looking to enlarge its territory and power during this time period and kind of spread more into Europe. So the direct cause of the war is that there were Christian shrines in the area of Palestine, which the Ottomans controlled, and Russia demanded that it be allowed to protect Christians who came and visited these shrines. The Ottomans refused, and so Russia occupied the territories of Moldova and Wallachia, and as a result, the Ottomans declared war in 1853. So Russia really used this religious argument as a justification for pretty much starting war with the Ottomans, and this became the beginning of the Crimean War. So the war starts out as Russia versus the Ottoman Empire, and one thing that might be kind of surprising given what we've learned about Europe at this time is that France and Great Britain entered the war on the side of the Ottomans in 1854, not on the side of Russia. We can use the balance of power to help explain this because they're very concerned, France and Great Britain, that if Russia is victorious and seizes this territory from the Ottoman Empire, then they will become even more powerful and that will disrupt the balance of power. Russia is especially concerned about getting the area around Constantinople, that's controlling that strait into the Black Sea, also controlling the Crimean Peninsula, which has been in the news in the past few years. Russia still has a major military base there. And if you think even back to the time of Peter the Great, where we talked about the importance of warm water ports to the Russians, they see this access to the Black Sea as something really significant. Another thing that was surprising is that Austria did not defend Russia and chose to remain neutral in this war. If you remember back to the revolutions of 1848, Russia had helped Austria put down the rebellion of the Hungarians, and so they hoped that Austria would come to their defense, but Austria decided not to. Piedmont, which we haven't even really learned about in this class, but it's a northern Italian state, joined the war against France and Great Britain. This is significant when we talk about Italian unification coming up soon. So Piedmont fought on the side of France and Great Britain, hoping that it would maybe have alliances with those countries in the future. And another reason, just to add, why the British especially wanted to enter this war is that they're concerned that if Russia gains more territory over here in the Eastern Mediterranean, controlling the Black Sea, that they'll threaten British naval superiority throughout Europe. Because Britain, we know, had the most powerful navy in the world at the time, and they want to maintain that. They want to be the top dog, and so they don't want Russia encroaching their military and their navy on any of this territory. One of the things that makes the Crimean War significant to European history is that it's one of the first wars that was majorly reported on and photographed and in the news. Because by this time, remember, people are literate, there's lots of periodicals, photography has been invented, and so part of the reason it becomes such a well-known conflict is just because people have access to information about it. And one famous thing from it that you may have heard before is The Charge of the Light Brigade, which was a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. This is depicting a particularly bloody battle where the British are attempting to launch an offensive. And he says, half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death rode the 600. Forward the light brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death rode the 600. So this kind of literature, and then I'll show you on the next slide, photography, really popularized the war, and people became very invested in their own country's outcome of this war. These are some photographs from the Crimean War. Remember, this is even like 10 years earlier than the American Civil War, which we think of, I think, in America as the first majorly photographed conflict. But the fact that these images were available to people on the home front, again, people became very individually invested in their own country's results from the Crimean War. Another famous person from the Crimean War is Florence Nightingale, who I just like to mention because sometimes people have heard of her and this is where she fits in history. Florence Nightingale was a British nurse, and she was responsible, at least the story says, for really organizing for the wounded soldiers and helping them receive good care. Now, there's debates over whether or not this really made a difference, because it's not as if they had antibiotics or really understood germ theory of disease, but she became a very famous person and also a model for women's roles and new jobs for women, such as nursing, during the 1800s. So the last thing are, what are the results? About 250,000 people died. 60% of these are soldiers who probably died from disease, especially cholera. And Russia lost the war. They surrendered in 1855 after the death of Tsar Alexander II. And in the treaties that ended the war, Russia and the Ottomans were not allowed to have their navy stationed in the Black Sea, which was a big blow because that was kind of one of the main reasons that Russia really wanted this territory surrounding the Black Sea. And then Moldavia and Wallachia were placed under the protection of all 5 major European powers. So the long-term consequences, and I think it would be good for you guys to pause the video and talk about these as a class, it destroyed the concert of Europe. So think about what the concert of Europe was and how that kind of alliance system broke down as a result of the war, who lost big in the war, and what might be the lasting effects of that. How might Austria's neutrality affect its place in Europe? So the fact that Austria did not come to the defense of Russia, what could be the possible effects of that? And who do you think might have benefited from the war? So go ahead and discuss those, and that's the end of the Crimean War.